I can still remember the day I first noticed how tightly I was gripping my avoidance of money. It wasn't some grand epiphany, but a slow, sinking realization that no amount of dodging bank statements or ignoring overdue bills made the problem disappear. At the time, it felt like relief, a soothing balm against the raw ache of financial uncertainty. I told myself, if I just don't look, if I don't think about it, I won't have to feel the sting of worry, failure, or disappointment. That little act of hiding, of turning my back on the numbers and decisions, felt protective, almost heroic, as if by running from the discomfort I was shielding myself from emotional pain. But the truth was harsher than that temporary comfort. The more I buried my head in the sand, the faster the shadows in my financial life grew. Simple choices procrastinated became mountains of stress. Unopened statements whispered threats rather than promised clarity. It wasn't just the money itself. It was the turmoil that followed, a knot forming in my chest when I thought about my bank account, the gnawing guilt whenever I passed an opportunity to plan or act, that dull, pervasive anxiety that settled like fog over everything. I was stuck in a cycle I could not escape, a tightrope walk over an invisible abyss of growing scarcity. Avoiding money, it turns out, was not just about numbers. It was a silent battle within me, a clash between a deep desire for safety and the loud, unwelcome reality that doing nothing only made things worse. The defenses that my mind developed to stave off pain, they not looking, they not deciding, were a trick my brain played, convincing me that avoidance was protection. Yet, beneath that illusion, avoidance sneaked in like a thief, stealing control, eroding confidence, and leaving me stranded in a constant state of crisis management. I remember one moment distinctly. I sat in my dimly lit kitchen, a stack of unopened bills beside me, each envelope like a small, heavy stone. My phone buzzed with notifications about payments I hadn't made, reminders from the bank I had learned to ignore. I felt frozen. Part of me wanted to rip through the pile and confront the reality, to face the numbers head on. But another part whispered, "Not now, not today." And just like that, I shoved the stack aside and poured a glass of water, pretending the problem wasn't there. It was easier, if only for a moment, to choose numbness over anxiety. That pattern, that emotional dodge, became my way of life. I reached a point where I lived day to day on the edge, reacting to emergencies, patching leaks, always chasing the next fire to put out. Stability felt impossible. The ache was physical, tight shoulders, a racing heart, restless nights. And yet, even with all this unrest, the avoidance continued. I was caught in a strange paradox where the very thing I feared, the discomfort of facing money, was precisely what made my reality so chaotic. But something inside me began to shift, a tiny flicker of recognition that maybe this wasn't the only way. I sensed, without fully understanding, that the battle I was fighting was not about the actual money itself. It was about something deeper, about the stories I'd inherited, the fears embedded long before I even earned my first dollar, the silent agreements I had made with myself to keep pain at bay. This avoidance was not weakness, it was survival. But survival at what cost? That moment, fragile as it was, cracked open a door. It invited me to question the cycle, to sense the possibility that stepping toward the discomfort could lead to freedom, not more pain. The notion that confronting my financial reality might not be punishment, but liberation, was both terrifying and strangely hopeful. It hinted that beneath the dread lay a path towards something new, where clarity and control replaced chaos, and where prosperity was not just about numbers, but about peace within. As I sat in my kitchen that evening, glass of water in hand, I made a quiet promise to myself, not to have all the answers right then, but to begin to face the money I'd hidden from so long. I understood that this journey would not be easy. It would stir old fears, bring up emotions I'd avoided for years. Yet I also felt, deep down, that this was the start of something necessary, something that could change not just my bank statement, but the way I lived my whole life. I wonder if you recognize this feeling. Maybe you, too, have found yourself intentionally avoiding your financial reality, not because you're careless or indifferent, but because it protects you from a different kind of pain. That quiet avoidance, while comforting in the moment, builds invisible walls that leave you feeling powerless and overwhelmed later. And like me, Perhaps you carry the heavy burden of knowing that each postponed decision is a seed of future struggle, even as you seek relief from today's anxiety. What if, just for a moment, we could hold compassion for this part of ourselves, the part that hides, ducks, and delays? That part is not our enemy. It is our guardian acting from a place of fear and protection. This journey I've begun, the one I want to share with you, is about gently unraveling that fear, about discovering how to move from avoidance to engagement, from silence to clarity, and from survival to thriving. I want to walk this path with you, to explore why avoiding money feels necessary and what it truly costs us. Together, we'll shine a light on the unseen emotional patterns that keep us stuck and gently learn how to face our financial reality without being overwhelmed by it. Because, as hard as it might seem now, stepping toward the discomfort is the first step toward breaking the cycle and finding not just stability, but peace and possibility in your financial life. As we begin this conversation, I invite you to reflect honestly. Have you ever avoided looking at your bank statements or delayed making financial decisions to escape the anxiety it brings? If so, you're not alone, and this exploration could be the beginning of a deep, freeing transformation. Let's take that first step together. There was a moment when I realized that sidestepping my finances wasn't mere negligence. It was a complex dance between my mind and emotions, crafted over years without my conscious permission. I remember a late afternoon when I found myself pacing by the window, feeling a cocktail of unease and desperation stirring inside me. My phone buzzed incessantly, signaling reminders to pay bills and attend to tasks I had systematically put off. I could almost hear my mind spinning narratives. If I act now, I might fail or make a mistake. It whispered fiercely, convincing me that freezing in place was safer than risking a stumble. This internal script was as if I was caught in a fog, where every decision seemed like wandering into unknown territory without a guide. This emotional paralysis was more than avoidance. It was a defense mechanism woven into my identity, a fortress constructed to guard me against feelings of vulnerability. What struck me later was how this fortress wasn't just rigid and protective, it was also silently isolating me. Like an actor trapped backstage, I was intimately aware of the show taking place, but disconnected from participating. What added a new layer to this struggle was how avoidance began to erode my trust in my own judgment. Each deferred choice was like a small fracture in the foundation of self-confidence. I would catch myself hesitating even on simple decisions. Should I open this letter today? Can I make sense of that app's spending summary? This hesitation wasn't born from laziness. It originated in a place shadowed by dread, one where I questioned my worthiness to manage my own affairs effectively. The more I delayed, the larger that invisible breach in self-faith became, until I was left standing on shaky ground. One afternoon, I vividly recall opening an old journal, dusty, forgotten, and scanning through old entries where I had recorded dreams of financial freedom alongside moments of paralyzing fear. The contrast startled me. It was as if my past self had been sending out SOS signals, caught between hope and terror. That discovery made me confront another silent consequence of my avoidance, the internal dialogue I rarely acknowledged. I hadn't realized I was inadvertently feeding a story that I was doomed to fail, a narrative silently rehearsed each time I chose disengagement. Yet it wasn't only about personal battles. What became increasingly clear was how this avoidance rippled through my relationships with others. I noticed distance growing between me and partners, friends, even family. Conversations once filled with shared plans and possibilities faded into silence or tension. When money was brought up, I often felt myself shrinking, retreating within, worried about being judged or misunderstood. My financial passivity had spun a web not only around me, but extending to those I cared about, creating barriers fueled by secrecy and shame. Perhaps most surprisingly, I came to see how this cycle of evasion fostered a peculiar kind of inertia that overshadowed other areas of my life. I avoided setting goals, delaying commitments that required accountability. Dreams got buried beneath layers of apprehension, goals whispered gently, without action, to back them up. It became clear, my hesitation was contagious, seeping into realms of creativity and ambition. This wasn't just a battle over dollars. It was a surrender of my own potential, parked on the sidelines because I feared the what-ifs that accompanied choices. I remember a specific turning point one early morning. I sat with my face cupped in both hands, eyes fixed on the steaming coffee in front of me. Everything inside me begged to turn away from the inevitable reckoning that awaited in the day ahead. An overdue call to a creditor, a budget that shouted urgent numbers. Yet in that raw silence, a whisper persisted. What if you treated yourself with the same kindness you offer to others? What if these fears aren't signals to hide, but invitations to grow? That tiny voice slowly broke through, coaxing me to glimpse another reality, one where I could reclaim control by acknowledging rather than fleeing. At that juncture, I understood the importance of replacing fear-driven silence with deliberate dialogue. Not only external communication, but inner conversations that invited clarity without judgment. I started small, jotting down experiences that arose when engaging with my finances, even if they triggered anxiety or guilt. This process was less about fixing the numbers immediately and more about tuning into how I was experiencing these moments emotionally. That awareness was an unfamiliar kind of courage, a refusal to let fear dictate the stories I told myself. Now, consider how this unfolds when you confront your own finances. The avoidance you may feel isn't rooted in logical decisions, but intricately wrapped in the emotional tapestry of your life story. It is a message handed down by years, fears, and sometimes unspoken family dynamics. Recognizing that this is a layered psychological response, not a personal failing, is liberating. It means you're engaging with something far more profound than a simple task. You're dismantling a protective shell that, for all its intention, has long outgrown its usefulness. This realization encouraged me to look beyond the surface and ask myself, what does financial courage look like for me? How can I nurture confidence in an area I have long feared? These were uncomfortable but vital questions that led me to gently practice presence with money-related feelings, exploring vulnerability as a doorway rather than a risk. As I began this practice, I noticed subtle shifts, not grand triumphs, but moments where I chose engagement over retreat, allowing me to feel more spaciousness inside. Such transformation isn't instant. It is a journey of peeling back layers, an unfolding rather than a rushing. But what changed for me, and what I hope you come to see, is that engaging with these emotions and their origins grants you access to an internal compass, a tool far more precise and reliable than avoidance ever was. This compass guides you not only through dollars and cents, but through the fears and hopes that shape your entire experience with abundance. I recall waking up one morning feeling a strange mix of dread and determination. The night before, a restless sleep had been filled with swirling thoughts about my money. But this time, something shifted. Instead of the usual urge to push the thoughts away, I found myself drawn toward them, like a moth cautiously circling a flickering flame. That morning, I didn't reach for my phone to scroll through distractions. Instead, I sat quietly, tracing my breath, gearing myself to meet whatever surfaced. It was as if I'd untethered a part of myself that had been shackled in silence for years. Yet, this encounter wasn't simple or neat. The sensations came in waves, moments of clarity interspersed with sharp pangs of disbelief. It felt exactly like opening a long-sealed box, only to realize it was stuffed with tangled threads I hadn't noticed existed. At times, I was flooded by memories of feeling helpless watching family members wrestle with money conflicts when I was young. On other days, a stubborn sense of unworthiness to claim financial security surfaced, whispering that I didn't deserve to prosper. What struck me was that these feelings weren't isolated incidents, but part of a hidden emotional landscape that shaped my decisions unconsciously. One afternoon, while sipping lukewarm tea, I found an idea about emotional budgeting that changed my game. Instead of approaching my expenses and income as purely mechanical figures, I began tracking how each financial interaction triggered different feelings. For example, paying a bill might provoke anxiety, while setting aside a small amount for savings sparked hope. I crafted a journal not just to log dollars, but to chart the emotional terrain of my money experiences. This practice felt like tuning a finely calibrated instrument. It required patience and gentle observation, peeling back layers to reveal what lay beneath my fiscal habits. On another note, I realized that framing money as a series of right or wrong choices had trapped me in cycles of perfectionism and shame. There was a pivotal moment during a conversation with a trusted friend when I confessed, "I'm terrified of making a wrong move because it feels like it will confirm I'm a failure." Their response surprised me. "What if you allowed yourself a mistake without it defining you?" That simple reframe cracked open space for experimentation and growth, dismantling the rigid standards I'd set for myself. It was liberating to accept that errors weren't endpoints, but stepping stones. Furthermore, I began to notice the language I used when speaking internally about finances. Words like scared, hopeless, and trapped had woven themselves so deeply into my self-talk they felt like facts. Yet, hearing myself describe my situation differently, to consider curiosity, courage, and even playfulness as valid financial emotions, shifted my entire experience. One morning, while reviewing my budget, I laughed aloud at a minor miscalculation, feeling an unexpected lightness. That moment was evidence that my relationship with money could transform from battleground to a kind of dialogue, a responsive, evolving connection. One challenge I faced was disentangling the cultural narratives about money that had silently infiltrated my mind. Growing up, phrases like "money doesn't grow on trees" and warnings about financial hardship were repeated incessantly. Those ingrained scripts colored my view, making comfort with abundance feel like a foreign, even dangerous idea. To confront this, I started a personal ritual. Each week, I would name one positive financial belief aloud and reflect on its meaning. Saying, "I am capable of managing my resources with wisdom and compassion," felt like planting seeds in a previously barren field. Over time, these affirmations helped loosen the grip of scarcity-driven thoughts. In the midst of these internal shifts, I also took steps to reclaim agency by creating micro-goals with clear, manageable actions. Instead of attempting to overhaul every aspect of my finances at once, I focused on attainable objectives, a call to a creditor, organizing receipts, or researching a budgeting tool. These small wins accumulated like gentle ripples, steadily eroding the monolith of overwhelm. I remember the relief flooding my chest after completing the first call I had avoided for months. My voice was steady, even when the representative on the other end confirmed my balance. The victory wasn't the result, but the act of facing the situation without flight. Now, imagine this path when you confront moments of hesitation related to your own fiscal decisions. The layers of emotion, family history, internal dialogue, and cultural messages intertwine to create a personal mosaic that influences every step you take. Recognizing these unseen forces isn't about assigning blame, but about embracing complexity with kindness and curiosity. The journey unfolds uniquely for each of us, yet it invites us all to reconsider our earliest impressions and to foster a dialogue where money becomes a source of self-awareness rather than conflict. At times, the process feels like unearthing a dormant garden, initially overgrown and tangled, yet possessing dormant beauty waiting to be nurtured. Cultivating patience with yourself during this rediscovery is vital. I found that the more generously I treated my missteps, in this and other areas, the more space emerged for genuine progress. The story I'm unfolding with you is one where we relinquish the myth of perfect mastery and embrace the authentic complexities we carry. In doing so, we build a foundation rooted in acceptance and hope, ready to support a renewed sense of financial selfhood. I still remember the moment I realized that my financial hesitation wasn't solely about fear of loss or failure. It was entwined with a deep-seated identity crisis that I hadn't recognized before. There I was, sitting in silence after a draining day, grappling with the growing pile of unopened mail, when the question unexpectedly surfaced: who am I if I stop running from my money? The thought startled me, as if a mirror had been held up, reflecting an unfamiliar version of myself, one compelled to face consequences, make decisions, and claim ownership over my life's direction. It was as if I had spent years playing a role, and now the script demanded a rewrite. That evening, I recalled a conversation with a colleague who described an experience that resonated with me deeply. She spoke of her journey away from financial procrastination, explaining that the root was not actual numbers, but the fear of losing control over her narrative. "When I avoided my accounts," she said, "I denied my ability to choose, to steer my life's ship." Facing accounts, budgets, and plans wasn't about math. It was about reclaiming my voice. That insight pierced through my fog. I understood then that staying distant from money was a subtle surrender of agency, an invisible hand placing limits on who I believed I could become. Embracing this revelation, I began viewing my relationship with money as less about transactions and more about a continuous dialogue with my evolving self. On a chilly autumn morning, I decided to journal a letter to my future self, detailing hopes not only for financial security, but also for emotional resilience and self-respect. Pouring my thoughts onto paper unearthed layers I hadn't expected, tensions between self-expectations and compassion, a tug-of-war between perfectionism and grace. This personal narrative, raw and unfiltered, became a compass guiding me through moments where uncertainty threatened to paralyze me again. One evening, as rain pattered softly against the window, I experimented with a practice I call visual financial storytelling. I imagine my financial journey as a winding river, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, carving through varied landscapes. Placing myself in this metaphor helped me detach from rigid judgments and see that setbacks were part of natural ebb and flow, not signs of permanent failure. This perspective shift opened gentle pathways to forgiveness, toward both past mistakes and current vulnerabilities, and sparked courage to engage even when the path ahead seemed unclear. I noticed that building trust with myself was fragile work. There were days filled with inexplicable dread that tempted me to retreat again. During these times, I sought small rituals that anchored me. Lighting a candle while reviewing my expenses, playing calming music while drafting budgets, or taking deep, mindful breaths before calls that felt daunting. These acts transformed an overwhelming task into moments of self-care. I remember smiling quietly at the absurdity of turning bill paying into a meditation. Yet that shift softened the emotional weight and untangled tight knots I hadn't realized were there. Experiencing these changes challenged my understanding of security. I previously equated it with perfect control, a static state where everything was neat and predictable. But embracing unpredictability, acknowledging that financial journeys twist and turn, helped me reimagine safety as a flexible, dynamic experience anchored in adaptability and learning. Meeting each financial interaction with curiosity instead of judgment loosened my grip on fear. It was as if I had been carrying an overstuffed backpack and finally unfastened it, allowing some weight to fall away. I came to appreciate that money's power extends beyond its practical function. It embodies values and personal stories that shape our self-perception. One particular afternoon, I sat with a photo album, revisiting images from my childhood home. I noticed how subtle messages about worth, success, and scarcity had been threaded into my earliest memories, often unspoken but deeply felt. This reflection uncovered hidden emotional cargo influencing my current choices, offering me a chance to unpack and reframe these inherited beliefs. Through this unfolding process, I witnessed a powerful emergent theme. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting thoughtfully despite fear's presence. I found this echoing in my experiences each time I took a step to open a statement, make a call, or plan ahead, even when my heart pounded and doubts crowded in. Recognizing this nuance allowed me to redefine progress as a series of deliberate acts of bravery, however small, rather than grand transformations overnight. Now, consider how this applies when you confront moments of hesitation about your finances. It's possible that beneath the surface reactions lies an opportunity, a chance to realign with your authentic self and rewrite the story you tell about your capacity to navigate uncertainty. This shift from feeling trapped to stepping into possibility requires listening deeply to both your fears and your aspirations. And through that listening, you might discover that embracing the challenge brings a quiet, steady power growing inside you, one click by mindful click. A few weeks into my commitment to confront my finances head-on, I encountered an unexpected hurdle, a strange form of resistance that wasn't fear in its obvious shape, but something subtler, almost like grief. One evening, as I sat staring at an open spreadsheet, my mind wandered to moments long past, memories of a childhood where money was whispered about quietly, often linked to tension and worry. I realized that beneath my avoidance lay a mournfulness for a kind of safety I never truly possessed. I was grieving the illusion of financial invisibility, that false sense of peace created by looking away. Accepting this sorrow unlocked a new layer. I wasn't merely battling anxious avoidance. I was also releasing attachment to a protective mirage, which had offered temporary shelter, but at the cost of deeper growth. In that moment, I thought about a time when I hesitated to open an official letter, fearing what might lie inside. The weight of indecision was suffocating, almost physical. But by allowing myself to sit with the sadness of lost opportunities and unmade choices, I softened the rigid grip that had held me captive. This emotional tenderness became a bridge to gentler self-discipline. Suddenly, paying overdue bills transformed from a daunting task into a reclamation ritual, a way of telling myself, I'm present now, and I'm worthy of taking charge. Through embracing this complex emotional mix, I learned that healing requires meeting ourselves not with criticism, but with empathy. On another occasion, I crossed paths with a phrase that struck a chord: financial resilience. Unlike simple endurance, resilience implied active adaptation, learning to bend without breaking amid monetary challenges. I remembered a close friend's story of rebuilding credit after years of debt. She described moments when panic surged, yet she deliberately chose to take one small action daily: checking balances, setting reminders, celebrating each payment made. Her approach was a mosaic of tiny efforts creating something durable. Inspired, I adopted this mindset, viewing each proactive choice as a thread in a growing tapestry, woven with patience and courage. This shift reframed the journey, acknowledging setbacks alongside victories, rather than demanding perfection. At one point, I arranged my finances side by side with my values by creating a money map on poster board. I scribbled down what truly mattered: security for my family, freedom to travel, supporting causes I believed in. Then, I traced how my current spending aligned or diverged from those priorities. This exercise illuminated surprising inconsistencies, revealing expenditures born from impulse or avoidance rather than intention. Confronting these gaps provoked a mixture of frustration and motivation. The process wasn't about judgment, but clarity. By giving voice to my deeper hopes, I harnessed a compass capable of guiding decisions each day. Shifting gears, I found myself confronting another hidden barrier: the fear of discomfort in conversations about finances with others. I avoided discussing money with close friends or partners, fearing judgment or exposing vulnerabilities. The emotional cost of hiding in silence soon outweighed the safety I believed my solitude secured. One afternoon, gathering courage, I initiated a candid talk with a trusted confidant. As I shared my struggles and gaps in understanding, a powerful relief washed over me. The conversation unfolded into mutual support and practical advice, steps I might not have taken alone. This experience underscored the importance of seeking connection rather than isolation, reminding me that vulnerability can be a catalyst for growth rather than weakness. During this period, I also discovered the value in ritualizing financial check-ins, not as chores, but as moments of self-reflection. Each Sunday evening became my sacred time for reviewing progress, identifying upcoming challenges, and realigning with intentions. I found that pairing these sessions with simple acts, lighting a favorite candle, brewing herbal tea, or playing soft instrumental music, created an atmosphere of calm invitation rather than fear. These rituals anchored me, transforming my relationship from adversarial to cooperative. Over time, the lingering dread dissolved, replaced by a gentle curiosity about patterns and possibilities awaiting my attention. An especially vivid image surfaced as I contemplated my evolving connection to money: a garden previously untended, wild with weeds choking out potential. By returning regularly, pulling intrusive plants, watering thoughtfully, planting seeds of new habits, I nurtured growth both physical and metaphorical. There were setbacks, dry spells, and pests, but each challenge taught me new ways to cultivate resilience and adaptability. This metaphor reminded me that transformation rarely follows a straight line. Instead, it meanders, demands patience, and rewards persistence. Now, consider how this applies when you face moments of hesitation or avoidance. Perhaps beneath the surface lies an unnamed sorrow for moments lost or a fear of exposure to others that you rarely voice. Allowing yourself to recognize these feelings without resistance can open unexpected pathways toward healing. By weaving resilience into your approach and creating intentional rituals, you forge a new narrative, one enriched with compassion and actionable insight. And in inviting trusted others into your journey, you tap into a network of strength that lightens burdens and expands possibility. This emerging awareness is not a destination but a horizon, gently beckoning you deeper into your own capacity for renewal and mastery. One evening, I found myself pacing my apartment, restless, as I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop. I was supposed to create a budget, but every time I opened the spreadsheet, a wave of indecision paralyzed me. It wasn't the numbers themselves that troubled me. It was the sense that my financial choices reflected on who I was deep inside, like a moral report card I could never quite pass. It struck me then. My struggle wasn't about dollars and cents. It was a reflection of unresolved identity conflicts swirling beneath the surface. I wasn't avoiding because I feared failure alone. I feared becoming someone I didn't want to be, a person who couldn't control their life or their worth. That night, I recalled a moment from years earlier when my parents argued quietly behind a closed door about bills and debts. I was a kid, overhearing fragments but sensing tension like a storm about to break. These echoes shaped my belief that financial conversations were inherently charged with shame and struggle, something best kept out of sight. But now, sitting alone with my racing thoughts, I realized those early experiences had left shadows that puppeteered my behavior today. Insidiously, they had crafted a narrative that money was a battleground where victory inevitably meant loss somewhere else in the heart. Driven partly by frustration and partly by curiosity, I decided to make a small but radical shift. I gave myself permission to redefine what financial success would look like for me personally. Instead of aiming for abstract ideals preached by society, I began to imagine a life where my money choices aligned closely with my values and well-being. For instance, I allowed myself to prioritize spending on mental health resources and nourishing food, even when the numbers said to tighten every purse string. In that moment, I grasped that a meaningful financial life could be a creative expression of self-care and authenticity, rather than a sterile ledger of right and wrong. In the following days, I started experimenting with journaling about my money moods. I didn't filter or censor, allowing raw feelings to spill onto the page. Frustration when bills mounted, fleeting pride at savings progress, shame around certain purchases, and hope for future abundance. This unvarnished documentation revealed surprising patterns. For example, I noticed a tendency to splurge impulsively after days filled with heavy stress, almost as if small acts of indulgence served as unconscious attempts to soothe wounds I rarely named. Unearthing these connections felt like a flash of light cutting through a thick fog. They weren't failures. They were signals pointing to deeper unmet needs. One afternoon, while going through old boxes, I stumbled on a worn photo album punctuated by breadcrumbs of family stories about scarcity and sacrifice. I lingered over a picture of my grandmother, stern but weary, standing in front of a small shop she ran. I thought about how her generation's struggles with money had compelled her to harden herself, to equate financial stability with toughness at any emotional cost. A strand of empathy intertwined with sorrow as I reflected on the legacy I carried, beyond bank statements, beyond budgets, an intergenerational code about endurance cloaked in silence. Recognizing this inheritance fueled a quiet determination to write a different script, one gentler and more nurturing. Later that week, I met a friend for coffee who casually mentioned her practice of financial self-compassion. At first, I bristled. How could kindness coexist with discipline? Yet, as she spoke, I began to see that self-compassion didn't weaken resolve. It fortified it by transforming inner critics into supportive coaches. That evening, I wrote myself a letter in the voice of a compassionate mentor, encouraging patience and courage during slips and setbacks. Reading it aloud, my voice cracked with emotion, yet I felt a balm settling over old wounds. This exercise became a lifeline during moments when I felt overwhelmed, proof that softness could coexist with accountability. One morning, amid a messy kitchen countertop littered with receipts and unopened envelopes, I decided to tackle the most daunting task: calling a collection agency to negotiate payments. My heart pounded as I dialed. When a calm, empathetic voice answered, it shattered my preconceived fears about confrontation. The agent listened patiently, offered options, and even praised my initiative. After the call, I felt a surprising surge of empowerment, as if peeling back layers of dread had revealed access to reserves of inner strength. That conversation marked a turning point. It wasn't merely about money, but a reclaiming of agency and voice that had long felt muffled. Reflecting on these moments, I see now that financial stagnation often emerges from tangled webs of identity fears and unspoken stories. Facing money involves stepping into complex emotional terrain where past and present intertwine. Approaching it with curiosity and creative self-expression rather than rigid rules and self-judgment opens pathways toward freedom. If you recognize echoes of these struggles within yourself, consider exploring your own financial narrative with patience and imagination. Allow yourself to tread new ground where your values, vulnerabilities, and aspirations shape your fiscal life, not as obstacles, but as guides lighting the way. Some nights, I would lie awake with a restless mind, not from an obvious worry, but from a subtle unease that crept along the edges of my consciousness. It wasn't a crisis demanding immediate action, no looming deadline or unpaid bill, but a quiet tension that whispered reminders of all the moments I had sidestepped important financial conversations. This gnawing discomfort was like a shadow following close behind, unnoticed until I paused long enough to sense its presence. In those moments, I realized avoidance was not just a temporary refuge, but a barrier that dulled my intuition and narrowed possibilities. One such evening, I found myself reaching for an old sketchbook, the pages yellowed and worn. Instead of tallying expenses, I began to draw abstractions, jagged lines morphing into spirals, dark pools lightening into paths of bright color. This act wasn't about art, but an unspoken language mapping the chasms within me. As my pencil moved, I discovered that I'd equated financial decisions with high-stakes battles, wars fought with numbers and cold logic, where every mistake meant defeat. But here on paper, I glimpsed another story, a landscape capable of oscillating between turmoil and grace, where uncertainty coexisted with hope. Later that week, I interviewed a mentor, a woman whose relationship with personal finances radiated calm and confidence. Her approach diverged sharply from the anxious narratives I clung to. Instead of framing money as a source of stress, she invited viewing it as an instrument, a tool for crafting life stories filled with meaning. She described routines that grounded her, like preparing comforting meals that honored her roots, creating budgets tailored to nourish not just bills, but values. Listening to her, I understood that crafting a healthy financial life required embracing creativity and intention, not fear-driven control. On another occasion, I confronted the subtle allure of perfectionism that often cloaked itself in avoidance. The belief that if I couldn't do everything flawlessly, I shouldn't start at all had kept me paralyzed. One afternoon, trekking through a forest trail with a friend, she noticed my hesitation before steep rocks and said, "You don't have to conquer the mountain in one leap. Step by step is enough." Her words kindled a fresh perspective. I began to apply the same principle to finances, breaking overwhelming goals into manageable increments that allowed me to build momentum and celebrate gradual advances. This dismantling of all-or-nothing thinking invited a sense of freedom, like sunlight filtering through dense leaves. Interestingly, I also noticed how my sensory environment influenced my financial engagement. For years, budget reviews were conducted at chaotic desks under harsh fluorescent lights, environments reinforcing stress and overwhelm. Then, inspired by moments of mindfulness, I crafted a dedicated money corner beside a sunny window, infusing it with plants and soft textiles. Engaging with finances in this gentle atmosphere shifted my experience from avoidance to curiosity. The act of sitting there became a ritual, a quiet conversation between my inner skeptic and emerging courage, each visit dissolving resistance a little more. On one particularly revealing day, I found myself wrestling with an unexpected realization. My financial fears were tied deeply to a craving for invisibility, a desire to fade away from perceived judgment or failure. I remembered a childhood event where I tried to hide errors from my teacher, fearing disappointment. This connection unveiled how avoidance wasn't just about the money itself, but a protective cocoon spun around vulnerability and self-worth. Acknowledging this deep-rooted origin reframed my relationship with the challenge. Instead of pushing away, I began approaching discomfort as a gateway to uncovering and honoring my true needs. In the middle of this inner exploration, I reached out to a trusted circle for the first time in years. Admitting my struggles and conversations sparked surprising relief. Through shared stories, I realized isolation had magnified my worries and fostered silent shame. My friends' responses, empathetic, non-judgmental, and sometimes humorous, felt like fresh air after confinement. Together, we brainstormed simple strategies, scheduling regular check-ins, exchanging resource recommendations, and holding one another accountable in compassionate ways. This sense of community diffused the loneliness tethered to my financial avoidance and offered a sturdy foundation beneath trembling feet. Reflecting further, I discovered that my relationship with time profoundly influenced avoidance patterns. The temptation to wait for the right moment, or when I have more clarity, often disguised itself as careful planning, yet served only as a stalling device. Recognizing this, I challenged myself to embrace decisive moments, acknowledging messiness and imperfect knowledge as part of the journey. In practice, this looked like opening unopened mail with acceptance of potential discomfort, or setting aside brief windows daily for focused financial review, even if the atmosphere felt uneasy. These modest acts of commitment chipped away at the inertia, cultivating a dynamic interplay between presence and possibility. Now, consider how this applies when you face the urge to evade fiscal realities in your own life. What hidden stories, sensory associations, or time-related traps might be entwined beneath the surface? What rituals or physical spaces could transform your experience from dread into dialogue? Whom might you invite into this terrain to share the burdens and illuminate pathways forward? Engaging these questions invites a living, breathing relationship with financial self-care, one that honors shadows without yielding to them and kindles resilience through ever-deepening connection. I remember the afternoon when an unexpected wave of clarity washed over me during an otherwise ordinary moment. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating the scattered receipts and unopened envelopes cluttering the surface. Instead of retreating into my usual habit of distraction, I let my fingers inch toward the pile, hesitating as a familiar knot tightened in my stomach. Then something shifted. I realized that the act of avoidance had cost me more than I'd acknowledged. It had quietly eroded my sense of trust in myself. In that instant, I understood that missed opportunities to engage were like faint cracks in a dam, each one small alone, but collectively threatening to break the barrier, holding back an overwhelming flood of anxiety. A few days later, I decided to experiment with cultivating tolerance for that discomfort. I called it emotional reconnaissance, a deliberate venture into uneasy feelings that usually sent me running. For example, rather than shuffling past an app notification about an unpaid bill, I allowed myself a moment to dwell on the unease and observe it without judgment. I noticed that anxiety didn't evaporate instantly, but instead softened over repeated exposures, much like dipping a toe repeatedly into cold water helps numb the initial shock. This wasn't about brute force or self-criticism. It was more like teaching myself to sit with tension as a visitor, not a tyrant, learning that I could withstand its presence without capitulating. In an unexpected twist, embracing those moments of vulnerability also unveiled an internal dialogue I hadn't heard before, a voice laced with curiosity and self-inquiry instead of blame. One evening, I caught myself whispering, "What is this fear trying to protect me from?" This subtle shift transformed money avoidance from a static obstacle into a dynamic landscape rich with insight. It dawned on me that each pang of discomfort was an invitation to explore deeper emotional layers rather than simply an enemy to defeat. This reframing offered a new kind of power, not the conquest of fear, but the generous willingness to meet it with openness. Building on this fragile courage, I introduced small rituals that anchored me during moments of financial engagement. For instance, I began lighting candles before reviewing budgets or listening to a specific playlist that calmed my racing mind. These sensory cues created a container for what used to feel like chaotic, overwhelming tasks. One evening, as I flicked the flame of a lavender-scented candle, I noticed a surprising calm wash over my chest, a gentle threading of peace weaving through the tightness I usually carried. It was as if I was weaving safety nets around the terrain I once fled, slowly reclaiming agency not through grand leaps, but through deliberate, tender steps. Another crucial layer emerged when I recognized the stories woven into ancestral memories. Sitting down with a family photo album, I explored images of relatives whose faces carried silent burdens shaped by economic hardship. I imagined the emotions behind those photographs: fear, resilience, pride, and understood that my own hesitation around money was threaded through a tapestry much more vast than personal missteps. Reframing avoidance as a legacy passed down and not merely a personal flaw reduced the harsh self-judgment that weighed on me. This realization was liberating, like releasing a heavy cloak I hadn't realized I'd worn, freeing me to write a new narrative rooted in compassion and intention. At times, setbacks appeared, moments when chaos threatened to swallow the fragile progress I had made. One afternoon, discouraged by a missed payment deadline, I was tempted to retreat into old habits, to pretend the problem didn't exist. Instead, I reached out to a friend, admitting my frustration and fear. Her response, anchored in empathy and practical wisdom, provided an unexpected lifeline. She reminded me that growth isn't linear, that stumbling is a natural element of change. That conversation illuminated the power of communal courage, the relief of shared vulnerability, and the profound importance of having allies who see our struggles without condemnation. Looking back, I realized these experiences deepened my sense of resilience far beyond financial spheres. I discovered that allowing myself to experience discomfort without immediate resolution opened doors to creativity, problem-solving, and authentic self-connection. Each deliberate encounter with avoided feelings became a rehearsal for facing bigger unknowns, weaving threads of trust and confidence into the fabric of daily life. What once loomed as an insurmountable mountain gradually transformed into a series of approachable slopes, each step forward reinforced by intentional patience and self-kindness. Now, consider how you engage with moments of avoidance in your own life. Could embracing the tension as a messenger instead of an adversary offer you fresh insights? What small rituals might anchor you amid uncertainty? Whose presence might illuminate your path when darkness threatens? These questions invite us to transform evasion into exploration, turning the shadows once feared into landscapes filled with possibility. Reflecting on this journey so far, I notice how the tangled threads I once thought separate, fear, identity, avoidance, and hope, have woven themselves into a single fabric that stretches across my inner landscape. It's like discovering beneath the surface of a restless sea that all the currents are interconnected, pulling simultaneously in different directions, yet part of one vast, living ecosystem. I begin to sense that the true terrain I've been navigating isn't external figures or facts, but an intricate, shifting emotional geography that requires a different kind of map altogether. There's a strange kind of momentum building within me now, subtle but undeniable. It's as if years of silent tension are dissolving into a fundamental shift of orientation, turning away from flight and toward engagement. I can almost hear a quiet voice beneath the noise urging me to step closer, not to the cold spreadsheets or daunting to-do lists, but to the core of my own experience, the intricate patterns of my thoughts and feelings as they dance with the idea of money. This is no longer about managing accounts, but about inviting a deeper dialogue with myself, where vulnerability reveals hidden strength and uncertainty becomes a landscape inviting exploration rather than retreat. In this space, old distinctions begin to blur, the lines between courage and fear, control and surrender, scarcity and abundance. I've come to appreciate that these seem like opposing forces, but in truth exist together, co-creating the rhythm of my financial life. It's as if a dance unfolds, one that doesn't seek perfection or certainty, but welcomes the complexity of movement, the ebb and flow of rhythm within and without. To move forward, I realize I must learn to listen closely to this dance, attuned to its subtle shifts rather than forcing a rigid step. Listening in this way requires a kind of radical presence, a willingness to sit with discomfort without reaching for quick resolutions or distractions. It means fostering an inner ground that remains steady while storms arise, holding space for the rawness that financial reckoning stirs up inside me. This is a practice I'm learning anew, not a feat achieved once, but a daily commitment to presence, curiosity, and kindness toward the parts of myself that resist and yearn simultaneously. And in this practice, something hidden starts to appear, a sense of creative possibility born from embracing complexity instead of fleeing it. I imagine now standing at the edge of a forest, the trees dense and mysterious, shadows playing tricks on my confidence. Behind me lies the path I've walked, fraught with hesitation and retreat, but before me, a canopy of unfamiliar hues and sounds beckons. It's part fearsome, part inviting, yet undeniably alive. I sense that to truly inhabit this space, I must extend my hand to the unknown elements, greet the unease as an uninvited companion, and learn their language. This is no simple act. It demands courage textured with gentleness, a blending of resolve tinged with compassion. As I breathe into this unfolding moment, I notice how the tiny choices made along the way, the small acts of noticing, breathing, speaking kindly inward, begin to accumulate like raindrops, shaping broader rivers of change. It reminds me that transformation rarely unfolds in sweeping gestures. It emerges in the quiet, incremental shifts that build resilience and clarity over time. These currents carry me toward a horizon where the internal terrain feels more navigable, where what once was feared as a trap can become fertile ground for growth. I wonder if you hear this invitation too, the call to explore beneath surface anxieties, to meet the tangled emotions and stories that have shaped your dance with money. Perhaps you feel the stirrings of a similar momentum, a shifting perspective beckoning you from retreat toward engagement. It is a path both delicate and demanding, one that asks for courage sparked by self-compassion and a readiness to embrace discomfort as a teacher rather than a tyrant. Together, we stand in this threshold, the air thick with possibility and shadow, poised to step beyond old patterns into a realm where clarity emerges not from avoidance, but from courageous encounter. The road ahead promises neither ease nor certainty, but something rarer, the possibility of reclaiming agency, not by controlling outcomes, but by befriending the complexities of our inner worlds and fostering a new sense of harmony within the intricate rhythms of our financial lives. As I step back and look at the winding path I've traveled, a truth unfolds gently, almost like the slow blooming of a flower after a long winter. What I've come to truly understand isn't merely about numbers or spreadsheets. It is about the quiet alchemy inside me, the transformation of fear into curiosity and avoidance into engagement. It's about reclaiming a space where discomfort no longer commands the throne, but instead becomes a companion inviting me into deeper awareness and possibility. In this intimate dance with money and self, I found layers of my own story that I hadn't seen before, threads woven from heritage, pain, hope, and resilience. In recalling whispers from my earliest years, the silent rhythms of tension and scarcity cast shadows that stretched far into adulthood. Yet, facing these echoes with open eyes and a steady heart has offered me a chance for gentle unlearning, a reshaping of narratives once etched so deeply they seemed unbreakable. The protective walls I built to shield myself felt like sanctuaries at first, but over time they revealed themselves as cages. With tender but unwavering resolve, I began dismantling those barriers brick by brick, guided not by judgment, but by a steady kindness toward my inner struggles. There was a moment I won't forget, sitting under a quiet sky that blurred from dusk into night, where I allowed the stillness to meet my racing mind. Instead of fleeing the rising storm of anxiety about overdue bills and uncertain futures, I opened a window, not a physical one, but a moment of invitation. I welcomed the fullness of my feelings, including the trembling vulnerability that surged beneath my words. And as the night breathed alongside me, I sensed a shift, a soft cracking open where rigidity once lived, making room for a new kind of courage rooted not in control, but in presence. In this unfolding, I came face to face with a paradox. The same part of me that longed for safety also hungered for freedom. Avoidance had promised refuge from pain, but delivered isolation and erosion of power. Engaging fully demanded that I embrace the unknown and lean into discomfort with a gentle steadying of my internal compass. What surprised me was discovering the resilience waiting quietly, like embers beneath ash, ready to flare as soon as I dared to breathe into that rawness. Through tender confrontation, I learned that empowerment doesn't arrive with fanfare, but through countless small acts, calling a creditor with a shaky voice, poring over statements in calm moments, naming fears aloud in trusted circles. These actions were humble gestures of reclamation, but each carried a weighty impact, kindling sparks of self-trust that grew steadily brighter with every commitment to honesty and growth. I realized that mastering money was inseparable from mastering my own internal dialogue, the narratives I told myself about worth, safety, and possibility. Looking back, it is clear to me now that the real terrain I mastered was the emotional wilderness that had previously held me captive. By inviting my shadows into dialogue instead of banishing them, I reclaimed a kind of wholeness, a layered identity that holds both strength and tenderness without apology. This journey is neither neat nor linear. It curves and bends with unexpected detours, yet it carries forward with steady momentum fueled by a deepening sense of belonging in my own skin. If you find yourself standing at the edge of your own financial wilderness, I invite you to look inward with bold softness. Recognize that what often feels like resistance or failure may be disguised openings, doors waiting for patient, compassionate hands to unlock them. These moments call for a readiness to step gently into discomfort and meet your internal fears with unwavering presence. In doing so, you nurture a quiet revolution within yourself, turning avoidance into exploration and hesitation into radiant possibility. Ultimately, my story tells me that freedom doesn't come from perfect control or erasing fear. It emerges when I learn to sit with uncertainty, allowing my whole self to exist fully. Fear, hope, imperfections and all, and to move forward with deliberate intention and grace. This way of being transforms the experience of money into a mirror reflecting not scarcity or limitation, but the vast wellspring of resilience, courage, and creativity that has always been mine to claim.